For just a few days, Ben Wilson was the best high school basketball player in America. At 17, he was already being compared to Michael Jordan, and experts were certain that a superstar NBA career awaited him. But then, a few seconds changed everything. 40 years later, many still say the world never got to see one of the greatest players of his generation. And at the end of this video, you will learn why Ben Wilson's name is still considered the greatest what if in the history of American basketball. In basketball history, there are names that have become legends forever thanks to victories, championship titles, and spectacular performances in the NBA. But there is another category of players. People continue to talk about them decades later, even though they never managed to play a single game in the world's strongest league. Their talent turned out to be so immense that even a short journey left a mark that still hasn't faded. That is exactly who Ben Wilson was. In the mid-'80s, his name was known to almost all of basketball America. Newspapers called him the top high school basketball player in the country. Scouts from the largest universities lined up to see him play with their own eyes. Coaches said that such a combination of height, speed, technique, and basketball IQ is extremely rare. Many were sure they were looking at a future world-class superstar. What was especially striking was how easily Ben dominated on the court. At about 2 meters tall, he moved like a guard, confidently handled the ball with both hands, saw his teammates perfectly, and easily finished attacks against players of any level. It seemed he simply had no weaknesses. He could decide the outcome of a game on his own, yet he never looked like a person playing only for his own statistics. Experts looked for comparisons to explain his phenomenon. Some said he reminded them of a young Magic Johnson with his court vision. Others noted his versatility and confidence with the ball. But most often, another name was mentioned: Michael Jordan. Moreover, these comparisons appeared long before Jordan turned into the greatest legend of world basketball. For a young high school student, such assessments were almost incredible. By the fall of 1984, Ben Wilson was officially considered the best high school player in the United States. For millions of young basketball players, this was the pinnacle that many strove for their whole lives, but only a few reached. Almost no one doubted that the next step would be an elite university, then a high NBA draft pick, and after that, a long professional career. However, fate decided otherwise. Just a few days after the whole country recognized Ben Wilson as the strongest high school player in America, an event occurred that shocked not only Chicago, but the entire sports world. One short episode crossed out the future of a man whom many considered the new hope of American basketball. To this day, experts argue about what kind of player he could have become if he had received the chance to realize his incredible talent. But before all of America knew the name Ben Wilson, he was an ordinary teenager who grew up in one of Chicago's toughest neighborhoods, where every new day became a real challenge. Ben Wilson was born on March 18, 1967 in Chicago, a city that was already considered one of the main centers of American basketball. But along with its sporting glory, Chicago had another side. Many neighborhoods constantly faced street crime, conflicts between youth gangs, and the feeling that any mistake could cost too much. It was in such an environment that the future star's childhood passed. From an early age, Ben stood out among his peers for his height. While other boys only dreamed of reaching the rim, he could already confidently fight under the glass with older players. But height alone was not enough. Many tall teenagers quickly lost interest in training or could not develop the necessary skills. With Ben, it was the exact opposite. He spent as much time on the court as circumstances allowed. The hours spent in courtyards and school gymnasiums gradually turned natural talent into real mastery. He did not limit himself to playing near the rim. Ben learned to control the ball, give accurate passes, shoot from a distance, and make the right decisions in fractions of a second. For a player of his height, this looked unusual, even by the standards of talented youth. coaches quickly noticed one feature. Most young basketball players tried to prove that they should be the main heroes of the match. Ben thought differently. He felt the game perfectly, understood when it was worth taking the initiative and when it was better to create a moment for a teammate. Thanks to this, the team became stronger, and he himself gave the impression of a player significantly older than his years. At the same time, off the court, he remained a calm and rather modest teenager. He did not seek to attract unnecessary attention to himself and rarely became a participant in high-profile stories. Basketball was gradually turning for him not just into a hobby, but into a real path that could open doors to a completely different life. Each new season brought noticeable progress. Those who saw Ben a year earlier were surprised at how much faster, stronger, and more technical he became. It seemed that his capabilities were growing literally before one's eyes. Gradually, talk about the talented teenager stopped being limited to one district. Coaches of other schools, local journalists, and scouts who carefully followed future stars began to talk about him. The real turning point occurred after enrolling in the famous Simeon Career Academy. It was there that his talent had the opportunity to fully unfold, and the name Ben Wilson first became known far beyond Chicago. The move to Simeon Career Academy became the moment after which Ben Wilson's career began to develop at an incredible speed. This school was already considered one of the strongest basketball programs in Chicago, but even here, the appearance of such a player quickly changed the balance of power. The coaches immediately realized that they had an athlete capable of not just winning individual matches, but taking the team to a completely new level. From the first seasons, Ben was amazing not only in scoring, but also in how easily he adapted to any opponent. If taller players were put against him, he would beat them due to speed and ball handling. If he was guarded by fast defenders, he used his advantage in height and physical strength. In almost every game, he found a way to become the main factor on the court. His versatility was especially impressive. In those years, most tall basketball players acted exclusively near the rim, but Ben freely started attacks, pushed the fast break, gave accurate passes, and shot confidently from mid-range. For high school basketball, this looked almost incredible. Fans came to the games not only for the sake of Simeon's victory, but also for the opportunity to see what else this unusual player would come up with. Gradually, his matches began to attract more and more spectators. University coaches, professional scouts, and sports journalists appeared in the stands. Everyone wanted to see for themselves whether the stories about the new phenomenon were true. After a few games, most doubts disappeared. People realized that they were watching an athlete who was significantly superior to the level of ordinary high school basketball. The team's success also spoke for itself. Under Ben's leadership, Simeon turned into one of the most dangerous opponents in Illinois. His confident play inspired his teammates, and in tense moments, he was the one entrusted with the decisive possessions. The higher the stakes, the calmer and more confident Wilson looked. Very quickly, his name ceased to be known only in Chicago. National sports publications began to write about him, and experts who compiled rankings of young talents moved him higher and higher. It seemed that with each new match, Ben was taking another step toward a future that many already considered inevitable. Soon, something happened that finally cemented his status as the main young star of American basketball. Now it was no longer just about the best player in Chicago, but about a basketball player who was called number one among all high school students in the United States. By the beginning of his final season in school, Ben Wilson had reached the level that thousands of young basketball players dream of. The authoritative publication USA Today placed him first in the national ranking of high school players. For American basketball, this was recognition of an exceptional scale. Only a few received such status, and very often they became future NBA stars. Now, every one of his matches was followed with special attention. Representatives of leading universities regularly came to Chicago to see Ben play with their own eyes. Among those wanting to invite him were the most prestigious basketball programs in the country. Everyone understood, getting such a player meant taking a huge step toward future victories. But it was not just his physical data that was impressive. Standing about 2 meters tall, Wilson thought on the court as if he saw the game several seconds ahead. He knew when to accelerate the attack, find an open teammate, or finish an episode on his own. Sometimes there was a feeling that there were no hopeless situations for him. This was exactly the quality that coaches and scouts valued most. Talk about his professional future became more frequent. Many experts believed that after college, he had every chance of becoming a high draft pick in the NBA. Some went even further, claiming that his potential allowed him to one day become one of the best players of his generation. For a 17-year-old high school student, such assessments were extremely rare. However, along with fame came constant attention. He was recognized on the streets, newspapers wrote about him, and his name regularly appeared in sports news. Just recently, he was an ordinary teenager from Chicago, and now the expectations of an entire city were on his shoulders. It seemed that a long career full of loud victories and big arenas awaited him ahead. But life sometimes changes fate faster than a person can take the next step. Just a few days after Ben Wilson officially received the status of the best high school basketball player in America, a regular autumn morning arrived, which did not portend anything unusual. No one could have imagined that this day would forever remain one of the most tragic dates in the history of American high school basketball. On the morning of November 20th, 1984, Ben Wilson, like thousands of other Chicago high school students, went to classes at Simeon Career Academy. A normal school day was ahead. The team was preparing for the new season, and Ben himself continued to live in his usual rhythm, despite the sudden fame that had fallen upon him. No one could have predicted that in a matter of minutes, his whole life would be divided into before and after. During a long break, Ben went outside the school grounds with his friends. Near the school, he ran into 2 teenagers he had not known before. According to witnesses, a verbal altercation broke out between them. What started as a regular conflict quickly spiraled out of control. A few moments later, one of the participants took out a weapon. Gunshots were heard. Ben was seriously wounded, and then, despite what had happened, he managed to get to his feet and walk part of the way back to school on his own. The people around did not even realize at first how serious the situation was. Only a few seconds later, it became clear that immediate help was needed. Medics quickly arrived at the scene, and Ben was taken to the hospital. Doctors immediately began to fight for his life. The injuries turned out to be extremely severe, and the next few hours became a real ordeal for both the medical team and the young athlete's family. News of the incident began to spread rapidly through Chicago, and then throughout the country. Friends, classmates, coaches, and people who had recently celebrated his successes on the basketball court gathered at the hospital walls. Many could not believe that they were talking about Ben Wilson, the guy who just a few days ago was called the main high school talent in America. It seemed impossible that such a bright future was under threat because of a chance encounter that lasted only a few seconds. Despite all the efforts of the doctors, Ben could not be saved. He was only 17 years old. The news instantly became one of the main topics in the American media. For the basketball community, it was a real shock. The country lost a player who many experts considered one of the most talented high school students of his generation. But the true scale of this loss became clear only later, when those who understood better than others what level of player he could have become began to talk about Ben. The reaction was unprecedented. Ben Wilson's story went far beyond sports news. National TV channels talked about the incident. Major newspapers published materials about the young basketball player, and people who had never been interested in high school sports heard his name for the first time. Just a few days ago, America was discussing a rising star, and now the whole country was trying to understand how such a thing could have happened. It was especially hard for those at Simeon Career Academy. Classmates and teachers had recently seen Ben in the school corridors, discussed the upcoming season, and made plans for the future. Now, the atmosphere at the school had changed beyond recognition. The basketball team lost more than just its leader. It lost the person around whom the entire game was built, and with whom hopes for an outstanding season were linked. Coaches recalled that in many years of work, they had rarely met an athlete with such a combination of physical attributes, basketball IQ, and work ethic. According to them, Ben was not limited by natural talent. He constantly worked on himself, listened carefully to recommendations, and strived to become better after every training session. This was exactly what distinguished him from a multitude of other promising players. Professional scouts spoke no less emotionally. Many were sure that they were looking at a basketball player who would definitely have been among the most prominent players in college basketball, and then would have had the opportunity to prove himself in the NBA. Some experts later admitted that they considered him one of the most gifted high school students in their many years of work. Gradually, Ben's name became a symbol not only of enormous talent, but also of unfulfilled hopes. Every time a new young player from Chicago appeared, journalists would again recall Wilson. His story served as a reminder of how fragile even the brightest future can be. Years passed, but the memory of Ben did not disappear. On the contrary, it became part of the history of American basketball. New generations of players continued to learn about him, although they never saw his matches live. And this was the most surprising thing. A man who never managed to play a minute in the NBA managed to leave a mark that outlasted decades. Over time, it became obvious that Ben Wilson's story did not end on that November day. His name continued to live where his journey once began, within the walls of Simeon Career Academy. For the school, he remained a symbol forever of incredible talent that managed to change its history, despite such a short path. In memory of Ben, the school administration decided to retire his jersey, number 25. For high school sports, such an honor is extremely rare. This number was never used by team players again, becoming a reminder of the person who is still considered one of the greatest alumni there. But the most vivid confirmation of his legacy was new generations of basketball players who grew up at Simeon. Many young players came to the school already knowing the story of Ben Wilson. They heard stories from coaches, saw photos, and understood that once, a person who was considered the best high school basketball player in the whole country walked these same corridors. It is especially telling that years later, it was Simeon that continued to produce future world basketball stars. Players like Derrick Rose, who later became the youngest winner of the NBA Most Valuable Player Award, and Jabari Parker, who was also considered one of the best high school basketball players of his generation, studied here. For many of them, Ben's story was not just part of school tradition, but a constant reminder of how valuable every day can be. Documentary films, newspaper publications, and memories of eyewitnesses returned attention to his fate again and again. People who watched Ben play in the mid-'80s told almost the same story. They were struck not only by his technique or physical capabilities. They remembered that even then, he looked like a player who thought on the court very differently than most of his peers. With each decade, one and the same question arose around Ben Wilson's name. The more time passed, the more often it was asked by coaches, journalists, and fans. No one could change the past anymore, but almost everyone tried to imagine what the future of this incredibly talented young man could have become if fate had ordered otherwise. Perhaps that is why Ben Wilson's story still evokes so many emotions. Unlike many other talented players, his career cannot be evaluated by statistics, the number of points scored, or championship titles. All that remains of him are a few recordings of high school games, the memories of people who saw his play with their own eyes, and the feeling that basketball could have received another truly outstanding star. Of course, no one can say with certainty how his path would have turned out. Even the most promising young athletes do not always become great professionals. But in Ben's case, the opinion of experts coincided surprisingly well. People who dedicated their lives to finding future stars claimed almost unanimously that his potential was exceptional. They saw in him a player capable of becoming one of the leaders of college basketball and then building a bright career in the NBA. It is especially interesting that comparisons to Michael Jordan appeared back when Jordan himself was just beginning his journey in professional basketball. This did not mean that Ben would necessarily have surpassed the greatest players in history, but such comparisons show how highly his talent was valued by people who observed the best young basketball players in the country daily. Today, Ben Wilson's name is not known to every sports fan. However, for those who are interested in the history of American basketball, it remains a symbol of enormous opportunities that never managed to fully unfold. His fate reminds us that in sports, there are not only stories of triumph, but also stories that left behind questions for which there will never be a final answer. Sometimes, the strongest legends are born not thanks to numerous victories, but thanks to the memory of a person who managed to give the world only a short glimpse of his incredible talent. That is exactly who Ben Wilson was. Decades have passed, generations of players have changed, new champions and new heroes have appeared, but his name still holds a special place in the history of basketball. And perhaps that is what makes his story one of the most poignant and unforgettable among all that have ever happened in the world of sports.